All right, hi. Let's give this another go. It seems a few people are finding these videos to be helpful, so I thought I would continue with another Pell practice or dummy thwack. So I do, however, have a question for you. So I'm not sure how people are watching these videos. I'm not sure if you would find it more interesting to have me talk through the mechanics I'm using, talk through my thought process, but perhaps you're sitting on your couch or you're commuting or something like that. You don't really have a sword in your hand. So it would be more useful for you if I sort of talk more theory, or if perhaps you're watching these videos while you are also able to train and it might be more of like a workout together. I don't know. So if you would, in the meantime, I will sort of try to straddle both sides of that fence, talk a little bit about theory in case you don't have a sword in your hand, but also talk a little bit about mechanics we might work on at the same time in case you are training at the same time. I don't know. My suspicion is most people are not standing at a Pell, or to be clear, you don't even need a Pell or a stick, but if you're able to stand up and go through a lot of the same motions, maybe that's helpful to you. So please let me know in the comments and I'll adjust. So also based on a couple of the questions last time, it occurred to me I hadn't really done enough setup and groundwork on why I was doing what I was doing. So I'm practicing my offsides, and last time I worked on what I called a counter-rotated offside, which is where my hips go the opposite rotation as the sword's. The sword's going this direction, but the body's going this direction. That's really good for a long-range offside. It's also good for hiding what that shot's going to look like. So I can throw from long range. This is a pretty short sword, but I can get pretty far with it. And also, if that looks like you're set up for your snap to here, and it looks like you're set up to your offside, it leaves your opponent guessing at about this point where you're going to throw, if you're not giving it away with your eyes or your wrist rotation or something like that. So another, well, there's 100 ways to throw a wrap probably, or a snap. Jeez, having trouble talking, aren't I? There's 100 ways to throw an offside, but in my mind, the next most basic set of mechanics is to drive from my hips the other direction. So I'm using my hips to rotate this direction, the same direction as the blade. And you see, I would say 80% of the time I see someone throw an offside, that's the way they do it. And it's a mechanic that's a little less natural for me. So that's a lot of what I've been practicing is the opposite of what we trained last time, which is this, right? That's what I'm working on now. So this hip rotation that goes in the same direction as the body, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can try to drive power from your feet, knees, hips, through to your shoulders and into your arm. Perhaps the simplest is to sort of create some body tension and lock your shoulder so that your shoulder and your hips go at the same time. They're sort of fused together like this. I would argue this isn't what you always want to do, but it's one mechanic. So as I rotate, it's forcing my shoulders to go, and all I need to do is open the hand a little bit, use a little wrist perhaps. Still not a super strong shot, but as soon as then I start putting a little bit of pull on my elbow. So I pull my elbow like this without necessarily sticking my arm out. All I need to do is that motion with my arm. I'm not cranking as hard as I can. It's not like I'm trying to do this, but as soon as I do a little flip up with the elbow, the hand almost wants to counter rotate. So as I draw the hip back, that creates initial motion. Then I lift the elbow. As I lift the elbow, that drops the tip of the sword, and it almost rotates around that center of gravity on the sword a little bit in the air. So as I go here, pull the hips, elbow comes up, hand comes down. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to throw that offside, but I find in my mind, either works. I'm either pulling this hip back or I'm pushing this hip forward in my mind's eye. Both work. But then critical for me is this lifting the elbow. And I've got an injured right shoulder that I've been working with for years, so I've got to be a little careful about the position. But this motion does not really impinge on my shoulder at all from that position. If I do it from a forward position, or if I do it from the side, this hurts quite a lot. But here, with the elbow in front of me to start, pointed almost at my opponent in a sense, right? I'm not actually standing like this, but with my arm in front, that motion is just fine, right? And what that does for me, I'm not sure if your mechanics are the same, but as the hip and the shoulder start to move, that gets a little bit of momentum in the sword, and then I just need to I'm using an okay grip, okay sign, pretty loose grip on the sword, and I'm just letting it drop. And at the end, I'll grab a little bit with my hand with the bottom fingers to pop that in. So start here, gripping at the top of the sword, move to the bottom of the sword. So it's almost going from a okay to point, right, from here. And that's where I'm getting some of my power. So a little bit of gripping at the end, little bit of elbow rotation, a lot of hip movement, and perhaps maybe a little bit of body shift, weight movement, that sort of thing. So as I work slow, I can see that I can work my targeting. That was off. I'm trying to keep my shield positioned neutrally. And again, I'm not going to suggest you just sit there and chop wood, same motion over and over. I'm working on certain things in my head. You definitely don't want to just forward, rewind, forward, rewind. That's not necessarily good Pell work, but in my mind, if I'm working on a couple things like my elbow-hip connection, just want to be focused on getting that right, right? So does that feel right? Is my targeting right? Am I using my hand? All right. And then I can start practicing with a little power. This is a pretty dead sword, so I'm not too worried about making a ton of noise or damaging the rope that much. So I can try, if I feel like I've got it coming together, I can try with a little bit of power. Now, that time I wound up. That's a bit of a cheat. People will often wind up for an offside. That's fine. You can get a lot of power, but I'm trying to learn, when I'm working my Pell work, I'm trying to go from a static position to a blow without going. That's obviously an exaggeration, but also a great way to pick up a block and then throw into your opponent. But I don't want to do that. So I can try it from here. And in this case, the hand position starting a bit different means I either need to reach a little bit forward at the same range. I'm starting to move my Pell around. Or I need to change the orientation of that elbow pull. So that elbow pull here is now going sideways a bit, right? This is just my hands pretty wide open, right? I'm literally just doing this with my fingers now, and I'm not relying on the trigger to throw that shot. Right, I've got a little bit of hip rotation, a little bit of, in this case, I'm letting my feet bust loose a little bit so that I'm not putting much strain on my knees. I think your knees, my theory about knees is that they can take some movement to accommodate for your hips, but eventually, I think someone else also pointed this out, you might occasionally want to let your feet go loose on the ground so that you don't torque your knee too far. And that was something that someone picked up on in my first or second video. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate the comment. All right, so as I pull that hip back, get some of that motion, get that elbow going. That was a different type of offside that Duke Davin taught me to throw. I shouldn't have done that. Not because it was a bad technique, but because it's not what I'm practicing. Going back to old techniques. That had a wind up. The other thing you'll notice, if this offside here, where the hip goes forward, right hip goes forward or sword hip goes forward, is at this range, to be effective going the other way, I need to be about a half step closer, right? And this one, I would say, this hip forward one that we did last time here, really tough for a snap. You don't see a lot of people throwing this. They'll maybe throw a punch or whatever. Same with the offside. If I go from here, kind of hard to get that offside in tight. But this rotational one where you rotate the same way, much better in tight, right? So I would say if your hip position is whatever you want, or you're able to do it from a neutral position, that hip forward offside might be better at long range. At medium range, they're both about the same. And at short range, that's where this one really becomes super fruitful for you. So anyway, just some random thoughts. So if we continue to work this one, right, I can let the back heel go on this. I'm letting the toe go on this foot. I feel like if I go on both toes, I'm not grounded. If I rotate on both heels, I'm not grounded. But if I sort of do a heel toe, that's the ball of my foot is letting loose here, and the heel of my foot is letting loose there, I think. Yeah, doing both heels feels weird. So again, this is just my thought process. And now I'm starting to feel like, okay, Well, we started by saying what happens if you lock your hip to your shoulder, right? That's great. We also can rotate our upper body independently of our hips, right? If we wish. So although this creates a very simple impetus, just turning those hips gets the shoulders going, you can also sort of get the hips going, then get the upper body going, then the arm, then the sword. So a little bit more of that sort of crack the whip motion like we did before here can sort of crack the whip on that one a bit. For this one, getting my hips going first, there's a few things I think that are a benefit and some that are a disadvantage. I think the blow is going to land a little bit later after you start your motion. And I think I also tend to, when I get the hips going, I think there's a little bit of a tell of motion, so I get the sword going. The advantages that I feel, anyway, are that with that sword going, I feel like I can get a little loose with it, get that tip going, the tip of the sword movement a little bit, and that can add a lot more oomph to the power, and that lets me also feel pretty comfortable shifting into a different motion, right? So if I'm here and I get that sword tip going, I'm thinking offside right now, but if I see them twitch their offside block up, now I can turn it into another blow, whereas if I just go, if I throw in a single time with my hip and my shoulder locked together, I'm committing to that blow, whereas if I get a little loose, I'm exaggerating a lot, but if I get a little loose with my hips and upper body, I feel like I've got the opportunity to change up after I've started the motion. So which is better, which is worse? I don't know. They're both different. I'm going to practice, by the time I'm done, probably 15 different ways to throw offside shots, and probably only 3 or 4 of them are good. Tell me. But yeah, so that's what I've been working. So just as a quick recap, the sword blade is traveling. If you look from the top down, the sword blade is traveling in the same rotation as the hips. The hips are either locked with the motion or they're going ahead of the motion. That is pretty effective at medium range. Might have to get the hand out a little bit. It's a little bit trickier because you're pulling the elbow and pushing the hand a little bit. That's one where getting the whip going actually feels a little bit more natural at long range. Once you get into short range, that feels much more natural here. You can even, given the opportunity, you can even short stick with it. Doesn't take a lot of extra power. So anyway, let me know if that's useful. Also, last solicitation for feedback, trying a new Bluetooth mic. I think it means the volume will be more clear, but the quality will be lower. So let me know what you think.